The dismiss-all-theme morning began like any other in the quiet, sun-drenched suburbs of Palo Alto. Birds chirped low near the hedges. The wind moved gently through the eucalyptus trees. And Rajesh Menon stood tall outside the iron gates of Sundar. Pichai's residence? He had done this for 15 years. The routine was his rhythm. He didn't just guard the CEO of Google. He protected the man behind the name. But something was wrong that day. At exactly 7:32 a.m. A sleek black Tesla pulled into the driveway, different from the usual vehicle. Two men stepped out. They were not familiar faces. They wore sharp suits and mirrored sunglasses, and one of them carried a brown envelope. Rajesh Menon? One of them asked. Rajesh nodded slowly. His hand brushed the holster at his waist instinctively. He had learned to read body language like poetry. These men weren't threats, but they weren't friends either. The taller one held out the envelope. Your services are no longer required. Effective immediately. The words didn't make sense at first. Rajesh didn't move. For a full 5 seconds, the silence thickened. Birds stopped chirping. Wind stopped moving. This is a mistake, Rajesh finally said, voice low and certain. I spoke with Mr. Pichai last night. He didn't say anything. We're just here to deliver, the shorter man said. Company decision. We've been instructed not to let you back inside the gate. Rajesh looked at the house. The windows were closed. The blinds drawn. No sign of Sundar. I need to speak with him, Rajesh said. That won't be possible, the man replied. And just like that, the gate closed in front of him. Hook and hair for viewers. This is where curiosity begins. Who fires a bodyguard after 15 years without warning? What is Sundar hiding? Or is something happening behind his back? Rajesh walked back to his old car, his mind racing. 15 years. He had taken a bullet for Sundar in Mumbai in 2011. Shielded him from a protester in Berlin. Once stayed awake 3 nights in a row when Sundar's daughter had a stalker. They weren't just employer and guard. They were friends, at least. Rajesh thought they were. Meanwhile, inside the house, Sundar was sitting at the breakfast table, staring into his coffee. His wife, Anjali, looked concerned. Are you sure this is the right way? She asked, softly. Sundar didn't answer. His eyes were red from a sleepless night. They told me it was for security, he finally said, that Rajesh was compromised. Anjali frowned. You don't believe that, do you? Sundar shook his head slowly. I don't know what to believe anymore. And for a moment, the silence between them said everything words could not. Later that evening, Rajesh sat alone in his modest apartment. He didn't unpack his bag, didn't turn on the light, didn't call anyone. He just stared at the termination letter. He didn't believe in tears. But something in his chest was breaking. Ben. A knock at the door. He stood up slowly, checked the peephole. No one was there. He opened it. And on the floor in a plain white envelope were 3 words handwritten in shaky ink. You are in danger. The envelope lay still at Rajesh's feet, as silent and threatening as a snake in tall grass. His eyes scanned the hallway. Outside his apartment, no one. Not a single sound from the stairwell. The flickering overhead light only added to the weight in his chest. His instincts, sharpened by years of high-level security work, told him 2 things at once. Whoever left it didn't want to be seen. And this wasn't a prank. Rajesh bent down slowly, picked up the envelope and brought it inside. He sat on the edge of his small couch, heart pounding against his ribs. His fingers hovered just above the seal. The handwriting was rough, rushed, almost as if the writer had been looking over their shoulder while scribbling the words. You are in danger. Opened it. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper. No header, no signature. Just 8 lines written in the same hand. They watched your phone. Your car was bugged 2 weeks ago. They found out you knew about Project Sandglass. You were never supposed to know. He doesn't know either, he thinks. He fired you, but he don't trust anyone or stared at the paper. Every word pressing down on his mind like cold fingers. The words didn't make sense, not fully, but the fear inside him bloomed with shocking clarity. He hadn't heard the term Project Sandglass before. Or had he? Something about it stirred an old memory. Perhaps a conversation he'd overheard late one night at the Google campus. Hushed voices, security clearance badges, tech jargon that didn't belong in the open air. But at the time, he hadn't given it much weight. His job wasn't to ask questions. It was to protect Sundar. But now, the silence surrounding him felt heavier than it had that morning. He stood up, walked over to the far wall, and opened a drawer in the small cabinet. Inside, a cheap prepaid phone. He always kept a burner, more out of habit than necessity. Today, it felt necessary that he turned it on. No signal. He moved to the window, pulled back the curtain, just a sliver dot down below. A black SUV was parked across the street, engine off, windows tinted. It hadn't been there earlier. He was sure of it that his heart rate spiked. He stepped back from the window, breathing carefully. Then he did something instinctual. He unscrewed the back of his main phone and checked the battery. Nothing strange. Then he looked closer. Beneath the battery, barely visible to the eye, was a small flat strip, metal, tucked into the corner of the casing. He swallowed hard. They hadn't just bugged his car, they had bugged him. 3 miles away, Sundar was pacing in his office. His fingers rubbed his temples as his assistant, Lena, read aloud from an encrypted email that had come in just 10 minutes earlier. The subject has been removed from the perimeter. She said, as instructed, secondary surveillance is in place. Awaiting further instructions from Division D. Sundar stopped pacing. Division D? He repeated. Lena looked up. I was going to ask you about that. I thought your instructions came through legal. This one didn't. He frowned. Who signed it? No one. Sundar sat down slowly. The pit in his stomach grew heavier. Something wasn't right. For the last week, he had sensed tension in his meetings. Brief, sideways glances from security staff. Locked doors he didn't remember approving. Calendar events moved without his permission. And now Rajesh gone. Without warning. Without a conversation. He had tried to call him earlier, but the number had been disconnected. He looked at Lena. I want to know exactly who ordered that termination. She hesitated. We'll need clearance. Then get it, he said. No. One fires my people without telling me why. But as Lena walked out, Sundar whispered to himself, unless I'm not the one in charge anymore. Meanwhile, Rajesh was on the move. He drove a different car now. A rental. One he had picked up under a false name using an old friend's credentials. He didn't trust the road, didn't trust his phone, didn't even trust the coffee shop, where he paused briefly to access the internet through an unsecured guest. Network. He searched project sandgss.nothing.no articles. No blog posts, no leaked reports. The internet, usually an endless ocean of information, was silent. Then he tried something else. He opened an old backup of security clearance logs he had kept encrypted on a hidden drive. It was unofficial, of course, just a habit he had developed over the years to cross-check schedules and internal threats. Technically, it was a breach of company protocol. But now it felt like survival. He scanned the logs. On April 18th, 3 weeks ago, there had been a meeting in Building 7, Floor 9, access restricted to only 4 names. Sundar was not one of them. But one name jumped out at him. Neil Sharma, Vice President of Emerging Initiatives, remembered Neil. Polite, quiet, but guarded, always wore the same gray suit. Rarely made eye contact with the staff. Something about him had always felt off. And now he was part of a meeting tied to a project no one was supposed to know about. Rajesh. He would find Neil. Asterisk in a quiet parking garage in downtown San Francisco. Neil stepped out of an elevator and into the passenger seat of a car waiting in the shadows. He didn't speak, just handed over a folder. The man in the driver's seat opened it. He's moving fast, Neil said. Burner phones. Fake rentals. Backdoors into internal logs. This is more than we expected. The driver didn't look up. Does he know about the prototype? No, Neil replied, but he knows about Sandglass. Someone tipped him off. Someone inside, We don't know yet. The driver closed the folder. What about Pichai? He asked. Neil, single quotes, his voice was quieter now. He's asking questions. He'll keep digging. The driver finally turned. His face was pale, expression unreadable. Then we accelerate. Asterisk later that night. Rajesh stood outside the gates of Neil Sharma's hillside home. The sky was clouded, no stars in sight. He wore a hoodie pulled low and gloves on his hands. He wasn't planning to break in. Not yet. He just needed to see the man to watch how he moved to read his face at 9:12 p.m. The garage door opened and Neil walked out, carrying a gym bag. Rajesh held his breath. Neil turned suddenly, looking toward the shadows. And for just 1 second, their eyes met. Neil froze. Then, without warning, he dropped the gym bag and ran back inside, slamming the door. Seconds later, an alarm blared across the property. Had been made. Asterisk he ran. Behind him. Floodlights exploded across the lawn. 2 large men came out of the side entrance. Not police, not private guards. These were professionals, trained, silent. Rajes slipped down the hill, heart pounding, lungs burning. Someone had just confirmed his worst fear. Asterisk. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a cover up. And if he didn't move fast, someone else might disappear next back in his home. Sundar opened his personal laptop and typed a name into a hidden internal system. A name he hadn't thought about in years. Project Sangless. The screen flashed red. Access denied. Level 9 clearance. Only stared at the message. He was the CEO. And yet they had locked him out. He sat back, staring into the glow of the screen. What are you hiding from? He whispered. Then his phone vibrated. A message from a blocked number. You need to meet him tomorrow, 11 a.m. The place you took your first steps as CEO. Come alone. Or don't come at all. Sundar stared at the screen, his reflection faint in the black glass somewhere deep inside him. Fear flickered, but curiosity burned brighter. Asterisk, the place of first steps. The early morning fog rolled in thick over the hills of Silicon Valley, making the world look older, quieter, and more secretive than it really was. Sundar sat alone in the backseat of his car as it cut through the haze, heading north. No driver today. He had told the team he needed time to think. They didn't question him. No one really did anymore. But inside, he wasn't just thinking. He was unraveling. His phone, set to airplane mode, rested beside him. The message from the night before kept echoing in his head. You need to meet him tomorrow, 11 a.m. The place you took your first steps as CEO, his first steps. That could only mean one place. The old Google campus. Not the gleaming new glass headquarters in Mountain View, but the modest, aging building on Charleston Road, where he had been handed the keys to a kingdom nearly a decade ago. The paint still flaked on the stair railings. The walls still smelled faintly of dry erase markers and bad coffee. He hadn't been back in years. Yet today, he returned not as a cactian, but as a man chasing the truth. He parked in the far corner of the lot and stepped out. His shoes crunched lightly on the gravel. The building stood in silence, barely changed. A relic now, its windows fogged over from the morning chill. He opened the side door using his old pass card. It still worked. His footsteps echoed through the narrow hallway. Room 204, the place where he had signed his first documents as CEO. The first time he had been told, you're not just building technology anymore, you're building history. He reached the door and opened it slowly. Inside, sitting by the window, was Rajesh. His hair was slightly longer than before, his beard untrimmed. He looked tired, not just from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much truth for too long. Sundar froze in the doorway. A wave of old loyalty and betrayal passed between them like a sudden storm. You look thinner, Rajesh said, voice low. You look like you've been running? Sundar replied. They stared at each other. Then Sundar stepped inside and shut the door behind him. for the first few minutes. They said nothing, just sat across from each other. The desk between them was covered in dust. A single chair groaned. As Sundar leaned back, "Why didn't you call me?" Sundar finally asked. "I didn't want this. I didn't order your dismissal." Rajesh nodded once. "I know." The words fell like stones between them. "Then who did?" Sundar asked. Rajesh reached into his coat and placed the folded note on the table, the one that had been slipped under his door. Sundar read it slowly, then again. His fingers gripped the paper. "This is ... This is madness? Is it?" Rajesh asked. "You told me once, years ago, that technology would be the great equalizer, but not if it's hidden. Not if it's used like a weapon behind the backs of the people building it." Sundar looked up sharply. "What do you know about Project Sandglass?" Rajesh exhaled. "Not enough. But I know they wanted me gone the moment I started looking too closely. I found your name attached to a restricted list. A list of people kept out of a meeting you should have led. And what was the meeting about? I don't know. But I know who was there. And I know someone from that room has been following. Or worse, they've been watching both of us." Sundar's face turned pale. He opened his laptop and pulled up the internal access logs. After a few keystrokes, he turned the screen toward Rajesh. "What am I looking at?" Rajesh asked. "My own access history," Sundar said. "This system logs every time I'm granted or denied access to sensitive data. Look." Rajesh leaned in. For the last 3 months, nearly half of Sundar's queries had been silently redirected, rerouted through third-party protocols. And most alarming, someone had used Sundar's own credentials to approve confidential actions without his knowledge. "They've been using your name," Rajesh said, "and building something under my company." Sundar replied, Then both men sat back, their minds connecting the same dots. It wasn't about firing a bodyguard. It was about burying someone who asked the wrong question. Meanwhile, in a steel-paneled room miles away, Neil Sharma stood in front of all screens. Each monitor displayed a different live feed, street cameras, hallway security, satellite imaging. And in the corner, a grainy black and white video showed. Sundar and Rajesh in room 204. "They've reconnected," Neil said into his headset. "Containment window is closing." A woman's voice responded on the other end. Calm, clipped. "Continue monitoring. If they uncover the node location, you proceed to phase 2. Understood." And Neil, the voice added, "No mistakes. This time, we can't afford loyalty getting in the way of progress." Neil said nothing, but his hands trembled slightly as he reached for the keyboard. Back at the old campus, Rajesh pulled out a flash drive and placed it on the desk. "I copied the logs of every person involved in Project Sandglass meetings," he said. "Names, dates, building access. Someone inside the company is running a shadow operation, and they've been doing it under your nose." Sundar took the drive and stared at it like it was a live wire. "What's on here could ruin everything." Sundar whispered. "Or fix everything." Rajesh stood. "You need to decide which one you're willing to risk." Sundar stood too. But before either of them could say another word, the fire alarm erupted overhead. Shrill, urgent, unnatural. Red. Lights began flashing in the hall. "We need to move," Rajesh said instantly. "That's not an accident." Sundar grabbed the drive. "Where do we go?" "Somewhere they can't follow us." But as they exited the building, a black drone hovered into view from behind the trees, silent, small, and equipped with an infrared scanner. "Go," Rajesh shouted. They ran down the side alley, through the fence behind the lot, feet slamming the pavement. The drone moved overhead like a shadow with wings. "I parked 2 blocks down," Rajesh said. "We get to the car, we disappear." Sundar didn't argue. But in his heart, something had already shifted. This wasn't about one man's firing anymore. It was about how deeply the roots of secrecy had spread, and how much he was willing to lose to pull them out. 20 minutes later, the drone feed returned to the screen inside Neil's surveillance room. 2 men in a silver, Sedan, dot facing north, dot facing the truth. They're headed toward Site 3. Neil said into the headset, dot the woman's voice returned. Then burn it. She said, but burn it. And then the line went dead dot back inside the car. Sundar's hand shook on his lap. Where are we going? Yes, dot rajesh kept his eyes on the road. A place no one talks about anymore. A building you don't even know your company owns. What's there? Rajesh glanced in the mirror. Answers. Asterisk, the hidden Satid sun had just begun to rise behind the hills when Sundar and Rajesh crossed out of the valley and into the sparse industrial outskirts on the northern edge of Palo Alto. The air smelled different out here, like old metal and dust, like forgotten places where ideas had once been tested and buried. There were no bright signs, no polished glass buildings, or cheerful slogans. Only warehouses, steel, fences without labels, and silence. Sundar sat stiff in the passenger seat of the sedan, clutching the flash drive in his pocket like it was a lifeline. The further they drove, the more his heart pounded with a sick realization. This was his company, his legacy, and yet every mile they traveled pulled him closer to truths he hadn't been allowed to know. He turned to Rajesh. How do you know this place exists? Rajesh kept his eyes forward. Because I was stationed here once, 7 years ago. Security rotation for what was labeled a classified development node. We were told it was a satellite data cache. But the number of unmarked vehicles, the rotating staff, the way certain logs were scrubbed daily, I knew it wasn't just storage. You never told me, Sundar said quietly. I didn't think I needed to, Rajesh replied. Not until your name started vanishing from access lists. Not until I realized they were using your leadership as a mask. They turned off the main road and entered a narrow, gravel-covered path that curved sharply into a wooded area. A rusty gate, long unused, stood ahead. No logos, no cameras. Just a small keypad hidden behind a bush. Rajes8 got out and entered. A 12-digit code from memory got after a beat. The gate creaked open. They drove in. The building was small, single-story, dull gray. It looked like it had been abandoned years ago. But as they approached, Sundar noticed the smallest signs of life. Tire tracks that weren't more than a day old. Freshly cut grass near the edges. And above the main entrance, a discreet plaque. Dome, a motion-activated camera, too clean to be old. This doesn't look like much. Sundar muttered. It's not meant to, Rajesh replied. But what's under it? They stepped out of the car and approached the door. Rajesh used another code, then placed his thumb on a barely visible biometric panel. Under the keypad, the door clicked open. Inside. They were greeted by a sterile white hallway lit by buzzing fluorescent lights. The walls were lined with large white panels, each numbered. And no markings, no labels. Rajesh walked down the hallway without hesitation, then stopped at panel 7. He pressed 2 fingers against the recessed indent and, with a gentle hiss, the panel slid open to reveal a stairwell going down, steep and narrow. Sundar hesitated. Why would my company need a hidden underground facility? Maybe because it's not your company anymore, Rajesh said. They descended. The underground level was colder, quieter, like a vault that had never breathed in fresh air. The walls down here were concrete, the floor smooth and gray. Everything was matte industrial and unwelcoming. They walked for what felt like 10 minutes through a single straight corridor until they reached another heavy door. This one was locked with a different mechanism, not codes or biometrics, but a rotating magnetic seal. Rajesh pulled out a device from his coat. Something small, black, with a wire and a flickering green light. What is that? Sundar asked. Bypass, Rajesh said, from an old friend in internal systems. This should give us about 20 minutes before the alarm system reboots. The device sparked once. Then the lock clicked open. They entered. What lay beyond the door was nothing Sundar had ever imagined. The room was vast, 3 floors deep, with metal catwalks and thick glass walls separating different workstations. Inside each enclosed space, clusters of machines hummed quietly. Screens displayed code. artificial intelligence graphs, neural net patterns, and something else. Footage. Hours and hours of facial recognition sequences being run through a system faster than anything Sundar had ever seen. In one corner, a large table held a full digital map of the world, slowly pulsing with red and blue lights. Tagged faces hovered over different cities like floating names in a battlefield simulation. Sundar stood frozen. "What is this?" he asked. Rajesh walked ahead, pointing to a terminal. "This is Project Sandglass." Sundar stared. "They're using our AI, our vision systems, to track people in real time." "Not just track," Rajesh said. "Predict, manipulate. This is surveillance enhanced by behavioral prediction. It uses user data to forecast emotional states, intentions, even choices." Sundar stepped forward, feeling the weight of 1,000 decisions pressing down on him. "This isn't what we built." He whispered. "No," Rajesh said. "But someone took what you built and turned it into something else." On one of the screens, a new face appeared. It was Sundar's, and next to it, a string of tags: high-value asset, restricted clearance, risk level, increasing status, misinformed us. Knees nearly buckled. He wasn't just out of the loop. He had become a variable to be managed. Threat. Up above. In a secure room miles away, Neil watched as red alerts began appearing on his screen. Unauthorized access. Node Site 3 surveillance bypass detected, door 7 open. Biometric match confirmed. He knew it immediately. He found it, he said aloud. A woman stood behind him. Now, not the voice from before. Someone else. Older, wearing a lab coat. "We didn't plan for this," she said coldly. "No," Neil said. "But it's happening." She studied him for a moment. "You still have time to fix it." He hesitated. "They're not going to let this go." "Then they don't leave that building." Her words were simple. Final. Neil didn't reply. He turned away and began typing. Back underground. Sundar turned from the screen and faced Rajesh. "We need to get this out. All of it. Expose it. Shut it down." Rajesh nodded. "I was hoping you'd say that." He pulled out a second flash drive, this one larger, shielded, designed to download high-volume data. They began copying files, one after another. Folders labeled: predictive conflict models, citizen sentiment, grading influence matrices. Active. Nations. Each file was a revelation. Each file was a betrayal. The download bar crept forward, but then the lights flickered. Once. Then again. "They're rebooting the alarm system," Rajesh said. "We have minutes." They packed the drive and moved toward the exit, halfway back to the stairwell. A deep mechanical noise echoed through the hallway, the sound of the main entrance sealing shut. Voice crackled through the speaker system. Neil's voice. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. "Now neither of you can leave." Rajesh looked at Sundar. "We've got one chance." "What is it?" "We make them come to us." Asterisk. The trap within sound of the mechanical door sealing. Shut echoed like a thunderclap through the underground corridor. It wasn't just the closing of a door. It was the sound of the world changing shape around them. Walls that once offered quiet now seemed to pulse with threat. Rajesh and Sundar stood frozen for a moment, staring at the red warning light. Above the sealed exit. Then the voice came again, cool and quiet through unseen speakers. "You've gone too far," Neil said. "You've walked into a room built for containment, not for questions. No one is coming for you. No one even knows you're here." The silence that followed was long and heavy. Sundar turned to Rajesh. "What did he mean, built for containment?" Rajesh took a step back, scanned the ceiling, the walls. "I think this place was never meant to be escaped once activated. We didn't break into a lab. We walked into a vault. And they're going to bury it, with us inside." Sundar's face turned pale. "How do we stop that?" Rajesh moved quickly. Now, his body remembering the training buried deep beneath the years of corporate security details. "We fight it the way they built it, through the system." He pulled the large flash drive from his pocket and slid it into a nearby access terminal. "This whole facility runs on isolated architecture. But the emergency override system has to connect to the broader network for fail-safe protocols. If we can trigger a false fire suppression event, it'll force the lockdown to lift. Won't that alert them? Sundar asked. Yes, Rajesh said, fingers flying across the touchscreen. But that's the point. 3 floors above, Neil stood watching the digital map of the facility. 2 red dots pulsed on the lower level marked as intruders. The room was silent except for the low hum of servers. A technician turned from his console. They're trying to access the suppression override. If they succeed, they won't, Neil said. He stepped 2. A black terminal in the corner and entered a code only 2 people in the entire company were supposed to know. On the screen, an interface appeared labeled Failsafe Firewall, Protocol 6. Neil hesitated. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He thought he was protecting something. The future. Maybe. A world where information could predict pain before it happened. Where decisions could be made without emotion. Where threats could be neutralized before they were born. But the project had grown teeth. It had become more than a tool. It had become something that needed secrecy to survive. And now, 2 men, one his former colleague, the other a man who had once saved his life during a protest riot in Berlin, were threatening to expose it. He closed his eyes for a moment, then he pressed enter. Down below, the lights flickered again, not in warning, but in shift. The emergency override panel vanished from the screen in front of Rajesh, replaced by a static block of text. Firewall protocol activated, local override disabled, facility lockdown. Permanent till manual reset. Rajesh's jaw clenched. He cut us off. Sundar looked around, heart thudding. What now? Rajesh stood up slowly, eyes scanning the walls again. There's one option left, which is we get a signal out. Sundar blinked. Through the firewalls? They're using signal jammers and internal scramblers. We're isolated. Not completely, Rajesh said. There's an old escape failover for biometric emergencies. Deep in the maintenance wing. It's not a network port. It's a biometric beacon, a pulse code that pings a dedicated receiver. At the original Google X site. How do you know that? Because I built the exit protocol for it when this facility was first commissioned. Sundar stared. You did? Rajesh nodded. They wanted a failsafe in case of biohazard exposure. Something that couldn't be hacked. It uses a 2-person sequence, 2 separate fingerprints. Once triggered, it sends a hard ping to the off-grid server they never updated. And what happens then? Either someone loyal hears it, or they send someone to silence it. 10 minutes later, Rajesh and Sundar were moving fast through the steel corridors, their footsteps sharp. Against the concrete, the air was colder here, the light dimmer. Old storage crates lined the walls. Things forgotten, prototypes abandoned. A ghost wing of innovation where nothing ever reached the surface. They found the beacon room sealed behind a thick manual. Lock, no screens. Just a steel door with a strange mechanism. 2 recessed slots side by side. Here, Rajesh said, wiping the dust away. We place our hands at the same time. It reads stress levels, heart rate, skin conductivity. Only works if both users are alive and conscious. Sundar nodded. He placed his right hand into one of the slots. Rajes took the other. On 3, he said. 1.2.3. They pressed. A deep thrum filled the air. Slow, ancient, like the sound of a machine waking from sleep. A thin line of green light traced the edge of the wall, circling once. Then blinking red dot signal broadcast. Active asterisk in a cold, dark server. Room beneath a shuttered building 40 miles away, an old terminal blinked awake. No one had touched it in years. It wasn't even supposed to be on. Asterisk. And then on the screen, a single message appeared. Biometric alert. Code 7 location. Node site 3 source. Pichai. Rajesh, menon. The system paused. Then, without any input. It sent an outbound ping to a list of names embedded deep in the backup node's architecture. A list that had not been accessed since 2017. Names no longer employed. People who had walked away. People who knew something was broken and might still care enough to fix it. Back underground. Sundar and Rajesh waited. Nothing happened at first. Then a small screen near the wall buzzed to life. A message. No ID. No trace. Received. Response in motion. Stay alive. Sundar let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. We made contact. He whispered. Rajesh smiled faintly. Now we hold this ground. But even as he said it, a low noise began rising through the facility. A vibration, not mechanical, but movement. Footsteps. More than one pair. Coming from above. They're sending a team. Sundar said. Rajesh turned and walked to one of the nearby crates. Pulled the lid open. Inside, gear. Old but functional. Personal shields, smoke dispersal tools, one or two compact devices for surveillance disruption. We hold the server room, Rajesh said. That's where the data is stored. If we lose it, we lose everything. They armed themselves quickly, like soldiers who never really forgot. And just as they stepped back into the corridor, the lights went out. Total darkness. Then the red emergency. Glow flooded the space. And the sound of boots on steel filled the air. They are no longer alone. In the surveillance hub. Neil watched the feed with an unreadable expression. A technician looked up. They've activated Beacon 7. Neil nodded slowly. Then it's already too late. Should we stop the team? He didn't answer at first. Then he reached for the console. Disable visual feed, he said. Scramble the logs? But sir, I said do it. And just before the screens went dark, Neil watched one final image. Rajesh standing in the corridor, body ready, eyes fierce, protecting Sundar. Just like always. Then the feed cut. Inside the server room. Sundar crouched behind the terminal. Banks as the sounds grew closer. His voice shook. We're not fighters, Rajesh replied softly. No, we're survivors. A metal door at the far end clicked open, and 4 shadows stepped inside. The first shot fired. Not from Rajesh, but from one of the intruders. The blast hit the far wall, but what happened next was something no one expected. One of the attackers turned and fired at his own team. The room froze. And then the masked figure pulled off. His helmet. A familiar face. A man Sundar hadn't seen in years. You sent the signal, he said. We came? Asterisk truth cannot be buried. Moment the helmet came off. The room shifted. Sundar's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't seen that face in years. Not since the early days of the Google X division, when innovation had still felt pure, when long nights were driven by passion instead of secrecy. The man standing there now, holding a tactical rifle lowered to his side, was Arjun Mathur, once head of ethical AI development, now long presumed gone from the industry. Sundar had been told Arjun had taken a bout and disappeared into the mountains. But that had been a lie, like so many things. Rajesh lowered his weapon slightly, eyes narrowed. You got the signal. Arjun nodded, barely. The old backup receiver was disconnected from the main relay. Took us a few hours to get it online. But the moment we saw your name and Sundar's, we came. Behind him, 2 others stepped forward. One was Meera Joshi, former risk compliance officer. The other, Lena Hoffman, once a senior systems engineer who had walked out in protest 5 years ago. After a secret vote approved live facial testing without public consent. They weren't here as heroes. They were here because they had once believed in something. And they couldn't let it die in silence. The lights still flickered above. The air in the server room was thin and humming with danger. Time was running out. Arjun walked toward Sundar, looked him in the eyes, and placed a hand on his shoulder. This place, Arjun said, is a graveyard for the future. You were meant to be the face of hope, Sundar. But they used your name to bury the world in shadows. Then help me bring it into the light, Sundar said. Help me finish what you started. Arjun looked over at the data terminal. We don't just leak this, he said. We broadcast it in real time to the one place they can't scrub, the blockchain civic ledger. It's monitored by a network of independent observers. Once it's up, it can't come down. Rajesh nodded. I downloaded the full dataset. Names, dates, code, footage. Then let's give the world a reason to listen, Arjun said. They moved fast now. Lena plugged into the terminal. Her fingers flew across the interface as the files loaded. Mira activated a second link, one that bounced through 6 anonymized relays before hitting the civic network. It was the digital version of opening every window in a fortress and screaming into the streets. Sundar stood at the center, watching it unfold, and for the first time in months he felt like a leader again, miles away, inside the main headquarters. Chaos was blooming. Monitors across internal departments began flashing red. Unauthorized outbound packets, encrypted, untraceable. Someone had tapped into the civic ledger. Worse, someone had released internal AI development logs and decision records directly linked to Project SANDGLASS. Neil stood alone in the surveillance room, watching the inevitable collapse unfold in front of him. The system he had helped protect was now devouring itself. Panic spread through the corridors like fire. Legal teams mobilized. Communications blacked out. External agencies were alerted. And at the center of it all, a single signature stamped at the top of every leaked file, pichai. At Colonel Neil closed his eyes. He had tried to protect the project by cutting out its conscience. But the conscience had bled back through the cracks. And now the world would know. Back at the underground facility. The upload reached 100%. Lena hit execute. And then, like a storm pulling back the sky, silence fell. It's done, she whispered. Ear pulled. A beacon offline. They know. The media will know. Lawmakers, regulators, they can't spin this now. Rajesh stepped away from the wall. His hand was shaking slightly, not from fear, but release. You saved it, he said quietly to Sundar. But Sundar shook his head. No, we all did. Because we didn't give up on the truth. Because you didn't give up on me? He turned to Arjun. How long before they come? They already have, Arjun said. Above ground. Unmarked vehicles had begun surrounding the property. Tactical agents in gray stepped into formation. But this wasn't a kill team. This was oversight summoned by the leak. Federal regulators, ethics watchdogs, investigative journalists. The eyes of the world had turned. Rajes, Sundar, Arjun, Lena, and Mira emerged into the open as the early morning sun lit the gravel beneath their feet. Not one of them looked like a villain. Not one of them looked like a rebel. They looked like what they were, people who believed in accountability. Reporters shouted. Cameras flashed. A microphone pushed forward. Mr. Pichai, a voice called. Did you authorize Project Sandglass? Sundar stepped forward. He didn't flinch. I didn't know about it, he said, voice calm but resolute. And that's exactly why I had to end. In the days that followed, the fallout was enormous. Investigations were launched across multiple agencies. Top executives resigned. Neil vanished from the public eye. Public trust, once taken for granted, now had to be rebuilt one word at a time. The documents revealed predictive surveillance tools, risk scoring algorithms based on private behavior, and foreign collaboration contracts kept off the record. But even amidst the damage, something powerful emerged. People began asking better questions. Demanding better answers. And in the heart of it all, Sundar refused to hide. He testified. He listened. He changed internal structures. He handed control of AI ethics boards over to independent organizations. And most importantly, he reinstated Rajesh, not as a bodyguard, but as head of global integrity operations. One quiet afternoon. Months later, Rajesh stood once again outside Sundar's home. This time not as a protector, but as a friend. You ever think, Sundar asked from the porch, how none of this would have happened if you hadn't gotten that envelope? Rajesh smiled. I think about who left it every day. Do you think we'll ever know? Rajesh paused, then looked at the sun above them. Maybe, he said. Or maybe the point isn't who warned us. Maybe the point is someone did. Sundar nodded. Then they stood in silence. Two men who had walked through fire. Not to destroy a system, but to remind it of its purpose. To protect, to serve. To remain human. Asterisk.